Hi, my name's Gordon Bass, and I'm a writer, and I want to tell you a story about a man. His name was Ben Carlin, and he drove the oceans of the world in an amphibious vehicle. There was only one problem: the vehicle tended to sink. Ben Carlin met my grandfather in 1947, so I grew up hearing stories about Ben. Eventually, I became so obsessed with his adventure that I ended up writing a book about him. Ben was born in Western Australia. He was a smart kid, but he could never shake the feeling that he had grown up on the very edge of the world. And so as soon as he was able, he wanted to set off and find adventure. He started by mining for gold in Western Australia, didn't do very well at that. He joined the Army and signed up for bomb disposal in World War II, but he ended up repairing latrines and runways, so he felt he'd been a failure at that. And finally, at the age of 35, he decided he had one more shot to accomplish something that would put his name on the map. He decided he was going to circle the world in an amphibious vehicle. The vehicle in question was an amphibious version of the World War II Army Jeep. So picture an Army Jeep with a boat shell around it, and that's what it was. Ben found one for $901 and spent the next year preparing it for his journey. He called it the half-safe. It was supposed to be good on land and water, but in reality it turned out not to be so great on either one. In 1948, Carlin and his American wife Elinore set off from Halifax, Nova Scotia. The journey was not smooth. The entire cabin was just 5 feet wide, so the only way to sleep was to curl up on the back bench seat. The engine was so loud that they just stopped trying to talk to each other. They hit a gale in the middle of the Atlantic. They thought they were going to die, and at that point they realized they hadn't even packed life jackets. So by the time they got to England, they had to completely rebuild the half-safe. They had less than $100 to their name, so they ended up stopping for 4 years. Elinore got job, and Ben spent a lot of time preparing the next leg of the journey. In 1955, Ben and Elinore set off. They thought it would take a year at most, and they would be able to return to their normal lives, have kids, and start a family. When they hit the Middle East and they were driving through Syria and Iraq, Ben discovered that he hadn't ventilated the Jeep properly. It rose to 170 degrees, and they ended up driving by night and then sleeping in the shade of the Jeep by day so they could avoid the heat of the sun. There were bandits, and there were some roads that they were crossing that hadn't been traversed by vehicles since the middle of World War II, which was 10 years earlier. By Calcutta, the marriage was over. Eleanor had had enough, and she left. Ben continued alone over sea and land for the rest of the journey. When he got to the States, he'd hoped for a movie deal about his adventure, but it never materialized. In the end, on May 13, 1958, Ben completed the journey. He traveled 40,000 miles over land and 10,000 miles over water. Part of the reason that Ben never found lasting fame was that there was no deeper reason for the journey other than to prove he could do it. This was the era before GPS and before satellite radio and before distress beacons. So Ben was really navigating just by the stars, and he taught himself how to navigate out of a book that he bought in a secondhand bookstore. What Ben accomplished, going around the world in an amphibious vehicle, it set a record that stood for 60 years. And not only has the record stood for 60 years, but nobody's even tried to replicate it, which gives you a sense of the magnitude.